Hi, I'm Marty. Welcome back. Hope you're doing great. In this video, I'm going to master the jingle. In the first part we had the recording process, and the second one the mixing process. And now I kind of want to show my mastering workflow. I master completely in the box and kind of show you what I'm doing. And it basically comes around to 5 points always. So the first one would be that I'm looking at the center image. So I'm looking if the left or right side is a little bit off, and what I can do about that, or if it doesn't need anything at all because it was tracked and mixed pretty good. The second step is EQ decisions. Should I boost the top end? Should I cut out bass frequencies? What about the mid frequencies? And I probably always use for that a linear EQ and a EQ to get a little bit of coloring for it. And the third step is compression. I think about what compressor should I use, how much compression should I use a multi-band compressor or something like that. And step number 4 is a kind of, I would call it the sweetening step. I kind of look at the track and decide if it needs like an exciter just to enhance the higher frequencies a little bit more, so to make everything more popping or exciting. Should I use a saturation plugin like a tape simulation or an analog saturation from a console? And last but not least, step number 5 is the actual, what most people think mastering is, the loudness step. I bring the track to a certain kind of level, or a certain kind of volume, and this is probably the most talked about step in mastering. How loud should I master my tracks? When you heard about the whole loudness war that we kinda come over by now, so the tracks getting a little bit quieter now these days, which is good. They have a little bit more dynamic in it, and we're gonna talk a little bit about that. So kind of how loud should my track be. Okay, and now let's jump right into the session and see what we can do. So as you can see, now here's the mixed on track of the jingle. I already added a fade in, which as you can see is just at the beginning and at the end. So just to get the silent spot here really silent. And also on the outro here a little fade out, not a straight fade out, but a little bit of a curve, so it's a little bit softer. Okay, now let's play the jingle a little bit and just listen to the track, and then I'm going to explain what I'm doing first. Okay, and when you look now at this meter here, at the goniometer, which shows the stereo image of the track with left, right and middle, and just have a listen to the snare and when it hits and where the kind of metering is here at this display. So as you can see, every time the snare hits, you get a pretty straight line, which is in our case good because the center image is pretty much in the middle. I know that because I mixed the snare drum right in the middle, and it also shows here in the correlation meter down here that there is no phase problems, because then the meter would be kind of here or in the red, which is really bad for phase, and it should be right here on the right side at +1. And also here on this meter from Waves, the phase is not lighting up, so it's a really good sign. And as you can see on this meter here, the left and right is pretty much the same level, which is the RMS, the low one. The higher ones are the peaks. So we probably don't have to use this plugin here. We can manipulate the center image. For example, you can rotate it to the right or to the left. But at this track, we are pretty good with that. And another good tool to check the phase is to make the stereo track a mono track, and it's also built in that tool, because you just have to reduce the width fader here. Let's get it into the 0 position, and with that we have a complete mono track. And now we're listening to mono. As you can see, no phase slide here, and on the correlation meter it's all the way to the right. So also here on that meter, so that's a very good mono signal here, it's right in the middle. Okay, so let's get that back and disable this plugin, because we don't need any stereo imaging, and which is kind of in my case the step 1 of the mastering process. And so we can switch to step 2, which is the EQ. And the first EQ I have here is a linear phase EQ. This is a very useful EQ plugin because firstly it doesn't add any color to the signal, and secondly it's a phase coherent EQ, which means if you boost any of the bands the phase doesn't get messed up. That's why it's a linear phase EQ. And the problem just with that EQ is that it adds a little bit of latency, and it's a little bit more CPU demanding than other plugins. So I recommend using that particular plugin just for the mastering process and not in the well, recording or mixing stage. So, but in mastering we're good with that, because everything is tracked and mixed properly, and so a little bit of latency is no problem here. Okay, so let's play the track and activate the plugin. Activate the analyzer. Okay, and now what I hear is that I'm probably gonna boost a little bit of the top end, and I'm probably gonna cut a little bit of low frequencies, and maybe around here, probably on the 1 to 2K range, I'm gonna reduce just a tiny bit because I think there might be the mandolin a little bit too strong. So let's start now with the low end here. So we make a low end cut, and let's go up there. So that would be way too much. So a good starting point is always 50, and I'm probably gonna use a little bit less here because we don't have any problems in the low end at all. Not that steep. around here. Alright. I don't need a shelf here. Let's get a band EQ and move it a little bit down. So let's just boost here. And swipe through the low end, and we probably Alright, I'm gonna put down a little bit of 50, just a tiny amount. Alright. And now before I go to the mid frequencies, let's add a little bit of a top end around 10K here. So that would be way too much. Maybe just 1 dB is probably enough. A little bit more. Alright, and now let's head over to the mid band. Let's boost that maybe a little bit steeper. Down that a little bit, but not with that cue. Oops. Alright, so I think that might just do it for the jack, because I don't hear any really problem frequencies in it. Let's listen without and then with. And now with. Alright, so as you can see or hear, there's a very tiny and little changes to the EQ because the track really doesn't need too much EQ at all. And what I also like doing is to get a little bit rid of the very high frequencies, which are around 18-20 kilohertz. And I use a second EQ for that. So even though we boosted around 10K and upwards, we're gonna now duck down the 20 kHz range, and I use a kind of a pull-tech EQ for that, the Buick Tech from Waves, and we're gonna select here 20 kHz, and let's just listen to it how much we want to actually attenuate. That would be too much, very muffled. It's getting better. Yeah, around here somewhere. Let's listen without. And with. even though the EQ adds a little bit of color to it and makes kind of a little bit thicker everything, but I kind of like that, and so it really depends on the track, but I'm very pleased with that sound, and so let's just leave it. Okay, and now third step, the compression. This can be tricky when you have a track that is heavily compressed already in the mixing stage. So I recommend really not compressing the track then in mastering, if you know that it was, or hear that it is heavily compressed. But I have on the master bus on the mixing stage just a light compression, so I'm going to add another compression stage here, and I'm gonna use 2 compressors in a row. And so the first one would be the Polk Child from Waves, I guess, and the second one then a multi-band compressor. And let's just start with the first one and listen what we can do with that. Okay, get a little bit of more input gain. So that would be way too much. Okay, so when I disengage now the compressor plug in, you will hear that it gets a little bit of quieter, which is kind of normal, but also at the same time it loses also a little bit this certain kind of a, I would say, clue that it adds to the whole frequency spectrum. And just listen to it without. And with. It kind of gets a little bit tighter altogether, and I really like that. So even though it's really not compressing much, it adds a certain thing to the sound. So probably gonna leave that. And now let's head to the multiband compressor. And first of all, multiband compressors can be pretty tricky. You really can overdo the compression, especially on the lower frequencies and the mid frequencies. I have a template here that I'm saved, which is a kind of a mastering template that I start off with, and as you can see, it has a little bump in the low frequency and the high frequencies. Add a little bit of gain here. So let's listen now to the multiband compressor, and then I'm gonna disengage it, and I'm probably gonna lower a little bit the high frequency gain and also the low frequency gain. So let's listen to it with. And without. Adds also a little bit of latency, so there's also a stuttering effect. And with. So you kind of hear that all the frequencies, especially the high ones, pop really out. So I'm probably going to tuck them down a little bit, maybe around that. And also a little bit on the lower frequencies, maybe around, well, let's make it all 0.5. So listen again. And at the same time, it also kind of excites the whole track, especially in the mid and the high frequencies. And as you can see, the bands that I use are here the low band is 90, low mid 600, high mid 4500, and 12K on the high frequency band. It's a very good starting point for multiband compression, and you can also with this plugin listen to the frequencies itself. So for example, now listen just to the low frequency. Or at the mid. Can also bypass that. So multiband compression can be tricky. It's a good starting point is always to start with minimum settings, so pretty much everything at 0, and work from there. Maybe some tracks don't need any compression at all, so then I don't use also no multiband compressor, but on this particular track I like the way that it excites the track. And yeah, so that's compression. And now let's head over to the next step. Okay, next step is the sweetening step, and as I talked before, you can add exciters and or saturation to add color, like from an analog console or from a tape machine, where you can use tape simulation plugins. And now let's start with the exciter, and I probably know that I don't use an exciter on this track because the linear multiband compressor excited the track enough for me. So, but let's try it anyway. So for my taste, it's a little bit too much. I could duck it down like that, but on this particular track I don't see any reason to use a dedicated exciter for it. So I just disengage it. And I probably want to use a little bit saturation, even though I used it in the mixing stage on the master bus. I really like the sound of it, and I'm probably going to use the Kramer tape for that. And there is a preset that's a really good starting point in the mastering presets here, which is the clean and open preset. So let's listen to that. Without and with. Okay, let's try to reduce the flutter a little bit. This one flutter is kind of the old tape machines. They didn't run really coherent, so they went a little bit slower and faster, and you could hear it in the tape kind of wobbling things. So just listen to it. And I really don't need that in the track, so I'm going to lower it around 30 maybe. And I also don't need the noise at all, so let's also get rid of that a little bit. Let's check the output meter. Maybe a little bit too much saturation on the output stage, so let's alright, sounds good to me. And the last step is what I normally use, is a kind of a channel from an analog console that is simulated with the Waves NLS channel. You have 3 different types of consoles here, which obviously this should be a Neve console. This is kind of a EMI console, I think, and an SSL console. And for mastering, the Neve is always my go-to for that. But let's just listen to the others anyway. Let's start here, maybe around 5. So that's maybe a little bit too rough for me. The Neve sounds quite pleasing. Maybe a little bit lower, the drive setting. Alright, I think I kind of like that. Okay, so now this were the 4 steps with EQ, compression, sweetening, and the first step, the center image, even though I didn't use that. It was a little bit fast-paced, maybe because I knew already what I wanted to do to the track, and I'm probably gonna make some more very little changes to it, but overall that's the kind of master that I wanted with the track. So, and the last step now is to bring the track to a certain level, which is the loudness step. So I use here the L2, which is a very simple but very effective plug-in or limiter plug-in to raise the level of a track. First of all, let's start just with the loudness. I'm gonna talk then a little bit about the quantized things here. So the first thing you want to do now is to set the out ceiling, which prevents the signal go above 0 dB, which will lead in distortion. So you clip the signal, and a good point for that is that I almost always use is 0.2 dB, so negative 0.2 dB, and it's kind of the ceiling where you get the maximum output but without clipping. So let's just play a track and engage it. Okay, this might be a very good point already. As you can see on this meter here, we have the top peaks around -1 to 0, or in our case, because the out ceiling is -0.2, so we are peaking now. You can also see kind of here, but that's not a very accurate metering. And here we have the RMS level, which is the perceived loudness of the track. And this is very important in mastering, to look at the RMS level. I kinda always try to have an RMS level of around -14, 13 or 12, but not more, because it really for me gets way too loud. The dynamics get really tucked down, and you can also see that the meters aren't really bouncing up and down. They're just stuck kind of at 0 dB. So that's for me too much, and let's just listen to it, and I'm gonna raise it above this certain kind of level. Now now the limiter starts kicking in. We're around -10. Now you can also hear a little bit of distortion. Would be -8 to -7. So you hear really a lot of distortion, and you kind of ruined the whole track with it. So let's back it down again and start at 5 again. So we have a very good RMS level here, and also kind of see it here on that. Maybe just a little bit more. So the limiter is just on some peaks limiting, and that's kind of my point where I stop with making the track louder. The meters are bouncing a little bit, you can also see it here, and that's pretty much it. I wouldn't make the track louder itself. Same holds true also for other tracks, especially with vocals in it. When I master kind of a rock or a pop mix, I try to really get a coherent level of loudness, but not over the top. I don't want to overcompress it, and especially I don't want to limit too much. The meters should bounce a little bit. I know it's very subjective. Maybe some EDM tracks need more loudness to get this kind of a pumping feel. And so you really have to listen to it, and in the end it will always sound better if there is not too much compression and limiting. It's better to use the volume knob on, let's say, your stereo hi-fi or a iPod or MP3 player or whatever you use. In the end it will always sound better if you have a little bit of dynamics in your track. Okay, and now a very good point here is with the release. I use the auto release mode, works pretty well. And the last thing here, the quantize feature, it now depends if you want to release the song as a CD master, or if you want to release it like a download on iTunes or Bandcamp or something like that. So when you release it as a CD master, you will have to quantize it to 16 bits, because CD is always 16-bit, 44 kilohertz. On the dithering side, I mainly use type 1 with normal shaping. You can play around with it. You probably don't hear any differences. They're very, very subtle, and so most important point is just the quantized 16 or 24 bits. And then when you want to bounce the track, you can go to File, Bounce, and Project or Section. And in my case, I have here on the output 27, 28 my monitoring, and I bounce from there. So I just hit here the bounce, and it's the same window as with the other option. And you want to make sure that you do now here 16-bit resolution for CD, and also 44.1 kilohertz, and the dithering to none, because you are dithering already here with the last plug-in, which is the L2 limiter. Quantizing and dithering always the last step and the last plug-in in the chain. You can also choose now what format it has. I recommend using the PCM format because it's a lossless. If you want to make also some kind of demo masters, you can use MP3 or M4A files. And if you want now to release it as a download, just simply click on the 24-bit hit again bounce, select here 24 bits, and the resolution, the sample rate, you can use a higher sample rate, but in my case the song was tracked in 48 kilohertz, so if you double now the sample rate like to 96, you don't get any benefits because the source material was tracked with 48 kilohertz. So I try always to bounce it with the same sample rate that it was recorded and mixed. So that's about it. And now when you bounce it, you can use it in real time or offline. Just simply hit OK. Get a name here for that. Jingle 1 master, and hit bounce, and gets bounced down. Okay, so now that was the mastering process. This is now the last step of the creating a jingle series. I hope that you had fun watching the series, and of course you learned a little bit about what I'm doing, and I tried to explain to you. So if you have any questions, just leave it in the comments below and I try to answer them. Please subscribe and see you in a next video.